The crisp morning air bit at her cheeks, each breath a clean, sharp intake of suburban promise. She was just a woman running, anonymous in her sweats, the rhythm of her feet a steady beat against the pavement. But to the cop who pulled up, lights flashing, she was an anomaly, a dark figure in a white world, inherently suspicious. He demanded ID she didn't carry, his voice laced with contempt, his hand inching towards his weapon. What he didn't know, couldn't fathom, was that the suspicious character he was about to unlawfully detain was Federal Judge Anita James, the very woman whose rulings on civil rights were already sending shockwaves through corrupt police departments just like his. His career and his ignorance were about to have a very public, very brutal collision with justice. Greetings, valued viewers, and welcome. The account you are about to delve into transcends a simple anecdote. It is a stark illumination of the subtle, insidious ways prejudice can manifest, and the extraordinary courage required to confront it, especially when it wears a badge of authority. We are deeply grateful for your presence here. If narratives that unveil truth, challenge complacency, and stir the spirit of justice resonate with you, we warmly invite you to join our growing community. Please consider subscribing and activating the notification bell so you won't miss the vital stories we are committed to sharing each and every day. Your viewership empowers these voices. Now, let us explore today's compelling testimony. The Honorable Anita James, at 51 years of age, was a figure of formidable intellect and quiet, unyielding principle. Her journey to the federal bench had been a testament to a resilience forged in the crucible of a society that often sought to diminish or dismiss voices like hers. Born in a segregated neighborhood in a city far removed from the manicured tranquility of Oak Haven, she had learned early the stark realities of systemic inequality. Her parents, a school teacher and a postal worker, had instilled in her a profound respect for education and an unshakable belief in the transformative power of justice. They had sacrificed much to ensure she had opportunities they themselves had been denied, and Anita carried that legacy not as a burden, but as a sacred trust. Her legal career had been meteoric, yet hard-fought. From a standout performance at a prestigious law school, where she often felt like an outsider yet consistently outshone her more privileged peers, to her early years as a tenacious public defender, battling in overcrowded courtrooms for clients, the system seemed eager to forget. Anita had always chosen the more challenging path, the one that led towards, rather than away from, the front lines of the fight for civil rights. Her subsequent rise through the ranks of the U.S. Attorney's Office was marked by a series of landmark victories against powerful corporations and corrupt officials. She was known for her meticulous preparation, her razor-sharp cross-examinations, and an uncanny ability to distill complex legal arguments into irrefutable truths. Her courtroom presence was commanding, not through histrionics or overt aggression, but through a quiet, focused intensity that radiated both intellectual rigor and profound moral conviction. Her recent appointment to the federal judiciary in the newly configured district encompassing Oak Haven was both a significant professional milestone and a deeply personal transition. Oak Haven, with its sprawling estates, its exclusive country clubs, and its carefully cultivated image of affluent, homogeneous prosperity, was a world away from the diverse, often turbulent urban landscapes where Anita had spent most of her life and career. She had accepted the posting with a clear-eyed understanding of its challenges. She knew that true justice required not just impartiality within the courtroom, but a deeper engagement with the communities the court served, including those that might, on the surface, appear immune to the blights of prejudice and inequality. The move itself had been a whirlwind of logistical complexities. Selling her city condominium, finding a suitable, if somewhat sterile, house in Oakhaven, and the daunting task of unpacking a lifetime's accumulation of books, legal briefs, and personal mementos. Her new chambers, though spacious and well-appointed, still felt impersonal, lacking the familiar contours of her old office. The caseload awaiting her was immense, a backlog of complex civil and criminal matters that would demand all of her considerable energy and expertise. Amidst this professional and personal upheaval, her only consistent ritual, her non-negotiable sanctuary, was her early morning run. Long before Oakhaven stirred from its slumber, before the aroma of artisanal coffee began to waft from its boutique cafes and the synchronized sprinklers on its emerald lawns hissed to life, Anita would be out on the winding, tree-lined streets, her breath misting in the cool pre-dawn air. These runs were more than just physical exercise. They were a form of moving meditation, a precious, solitary hour where her mind could sift through the intricate details of legal arguments, grapple with the ethical complexities of sentencing guidelines, and confront the ever-present, often heavy weight of the judicial decisions she was called upon to make. Dressed in unassuming, well-worn running gear, a faded Howard University sweatshirt, a cherished memento from her alma mater, comfortable, unbranded leggings, a soft knit cap pulled low over her neatly braided hair. She was anonymous, just another solitary figure pounding the pavement, seeking fitness or perhaps, like her, a moment of mental clarity. This invisibility was a welcome, if temporary, respite from the formal robes, the deferential "Your Honors," and the solemn public authority that defined her professional life. She carried no identification on these runs, no phone to shatter the fragile peace, nothing but the steady, rhythmic cadence of her own thoughts and the familiar, welcome burn in her lungs as she pushed her body and cleared her mind. These runs were her church, her therapist's couch, her quiet, uncluttered space to connect with her own inner compass before the manifold demands of the day descended upon her. Oakhaven, she was discovering, boasted an extensive network of beautifully maintained public parks and meticulously landscaped jogging trails, a testament to the town's affluence and its residents' commitment to an active, outdoor lifestyle. Still new to the area, Anita had been systematically exploring these green spaces, each run an opportunity to learn the unfamiliar geography of her new home. That crisp, brilliant autumn morning, she chose a route she hadn't tried before, one that skirted the perimeter of Willow Creek Park, a sprawling, verdant expanse of ancient oaks and meandering pathways that bordered a particularly exclusive, gated residential enclave known as the Preserves. The sun was just beginning to crest the horizon, painting the eastern sky in breathtaking hues of apricot, lavender, and rose. The air was still, carrying the faint, sweet scent of decaying leaves and wood smoke from a distant chimney. The only sounds were the cheerful, insistent chirping of early birds and the soft, rhythmic thud of her well-cushioned running shoes on the asphalt path. For a few precious moments she felt a rare, profound sense of peace, a moment of uncluttered clarity and quiet joy. It was shattered with the sudden, jarring, and utterly unwelcome flash of blue and red lights in her peripheral vision. The strobing, aggressive colors seemed to rip through the tranquil dawn like a shriek. A Oakhaven Police Department cruiser, which had been idling inconspicuously, almost stealthily, by a little-used park entrance she hadn't even consciously registered, pulled sharply and aggressively alongside her, its tires crunching loudly on the gravel shoulder of the path, kicking up a small cloud of dust. Anita, startled, slowed her pace immediately, then came to a stop, her heart rate, already elevated from the sustained exertion of her run, kicking up another unwelcome notch. This time, it was not the healthy thrum of exercise, but a jolt of pure adrenaline, accompanied by a familiar, weary, and deeply unsettling sense of foreboding. She pulled off her knit cap, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps, now more from surprise and a dawning apprehension than from physical exertion. The passenger side window of the cruiser glided down with a soft electronic whir, revealing Officer Douglas Miller. Miller was a man in his late 30s, though the hard set of his features and a prematurely receding hairline made him appear older. He possessed a thick-set, imposing build, the kind that strained the seams of his neatly pressed uniform, and a pair of pale, watery blue eyes that seemed to register everything on a superficial level, while understanding very little of its deeper context or nuance. He was, Anita would later learn, a product of Oakhaven, a lifer on the local police force, a man imbued with the unquestioning, often unexamined self-assurance of someone whose authority had rarely, if ever, been seriously challenged, particularly not by someone who looked like Anita James did in that moment, in her current unassuming guise. To him, in that instant, she was not the Honorable Anita James, a distinguished member of the federal judiciary, a pillar of the legal community. She was, quite simply, a black woman, running alone in a nice, predominantly white part of town where, in his unarticulated but deeply ingrained and prejudiced worldview, she didn't quite belong and therefore was inherently suspect. "Morning, ma'am," Miller said, his voice flat, devoid of the polite deference or even basic courtesy usually afforded to residents, or indeed any individual, in this upscale, image-conscious neighborhood. His tone was not inquisitive, it was challenging. "Everything all right here?" The question itself, given the context of his sudden, aggressive approach, was an accusation wrapped in a thin veneer of official procedure. Anita, though her internal alarm bells were now clanging with a deafening insistence, fought to keep her voice even, respectful, betraying none of the sudden tension that coiled in her stomach. "Yes, officer, everything is quite fine, thank you," she replied, her enunciation precise, her tone measured. "I am simply enjoying a morning run." She made a deliberate effort to meet his gaze, a practice honed through years of facing down hostile witnesses and overzealous prosecutors. Miller's eyes, however, didn't meet hers with any sense of mutual recognition or professional courtesy. Instead, they scanned her, slowly, appraisingly, from her running shoes to her knit cap, lingering for a moment too long, a gaze that felt both intrusive and demeaning. "You from around here?" he asked, his tone hardening slightly, a subtle shift from feigned concern to overt suspicion. "Don't think I've seen you on this particular route before." The implication was clear. Her presence was an anomaly, an unwelcome deviation from the expected norm. "I recently moved to Oakhaven, officer," Anita replied, keeping her answers concise, direct, offering no unnecessary information that could be twisted or misinterpreted. She knew this insidious dance, this subtle, escalating interrogation disguised as casual, on-the-street inquiry. She'd presided over enough cases involving clear instances of racial profiling to recognize its insidious, step-by-step choreography. "Moved here, huh?" Miller's lips tightened into a thin, skeptical line. He leaned slightly out of the car window, his posture subtly more confrontational. "Mind telling me where exactly you're headed this fine morning? Or perhaps where you're coming from?" His questions were no longer casual. They were pointed, probing, designed to unsettle and assert dominance. "I am simply out for a run in a public park, officer, as I believe is my constitutional right," Anita stated, a distinct hint of judicial firmness now deliberately creeping into her voice. She was tired of this charade. She was profoundly annoyed by the baseless suspicion, and she was acutely professionally aware of how quickly these kinds of street encounters could escalate if not handled with precise, unwavering legalistic calm. Yet, even as she asserted her rights, a part of her despaired at the depressing predictability of the situation. "You're right, huh?" Miller let out a short, humorless, contemptuous chuckle. The sound grated on Anita's nerves. "Well, ma'am, you should know we've had a few, shall we say, reports of some rather suspicious activity in this particular area lately. Some minor break-ins, a couple of attempted car thefts. You know, people seeing folks around who don't quite fit the general profile of the neighborhood, if you catch my drift." His gaze was now pointedly direct, a clear, unambiguous, and deeply offensive insinuation. He was, in no uncertain terms, suggesting she was a potential criminal. Anita felt a cold, hard anger rise within her, an anger she had learned over many years to control, to channel, to use as fuel rather than let it consume her. But it was there, a simmering ember. She pushed it down, her years of courtroom composure, of maintaining an unflappable demeanor in the face of blatant provocation, taking over. "Officer Miller," she said, her eyes meeting his directly, her voice now carrying the unmistakable weight of someone accustomed to being heard and obeyed. "Are you suggesting, for the record, that my presence here, a black woman jogging in a public park at sunrise, constitutes suspicious activity in your professional judgment, solely and exclusively because of the color of my skin?" The directness and legalistic precision of the question seemed to momentarily throw Miller off balance. He clearly wasn't used to being challenged with such articulate clarity, certainly not by someone he had already mentally categorized, stereotyped, and dismissed as insignificant. He bristled visibly, his neck flushing a dull, angry red. "Now, I didn't say that, ma'am," he stammered, clearly flustered. "I'm just doing my job. You know, due diligence. Standard operating procedure when we encounter someone unfamiliar in an area that's had a recent spike in incidents." He was backpedaling, trying to regain his footing, but his tone remained aggressive, defensive. "You got any form of identification on you, something to prove you live where you say you live, something to verify your story?" "I do not carry formal identification when I am exercising, officer," Anita replied calmly, though the effort to maintain that calm was becoming immense. "Nor, as I am sure you are aware from your training, am I legally required to produce identification in the state of Georgia unless I am operating a motor vehicle, or you have a reasonable, articulable suspicion that I have committed, am committing, or am about to commit a specific crime. My jogging in a public park at dawn, officer, and I state this for the record you are undoubtedly creating, does not by any stretch of the legal imagination meet that necessary threshold." She recited the legal standard almost by rote, the words familiar and well-worn from countless courtroom arguments, from innumerable judicial opinions she herself had penned. This, however, was not a hallowed courtroom where logic and law held sway. This was a sun-dappled jogging path in Oakhaven, and Officer Douglas Miller was clearly not interested in a nuanced academic discussion of constitutional law or reasonable suspicion. He saw her response not as a legitimate assertion of her fundamental rights, but as blatant defiance, as a direct, insolent affront to his authority as a uniformed officer of the law. His face, already flushed, darkened further. "Look, lady," he snapped, his voice now openly hostile, dripping with contempt. "I don't need a damn law lecture from you. You're in my town, my jurisdiction, and if I, as a sworn police officer, ask you for your ID, you damn well better produce it, or things are going to get a whole lot more complicated for you real fast. You understand me, or do I need to spell it out for you in smaller words?" He deliberately, pointedly, placed a hand on the hard black snap of his holster. a gesture that was both an unambiguous threat and a crude, thuggish display of his perceived power. Anita stood her ground, her posture, even in her simple running clothes, radiating an innate, unshakable authority that Miller, in his escalating bluster and prejudiced blindness, utterly failed to recognize or comprehend. "Officer," she said, her voice dropping to a low, steely, almost dangerously quiet calm, the kind of tone that usually made seasoned, high-priced attorneys quail in her courtroom. "You are currently engaging in what very clearly appears to be an instance of unlawful detention, predicated almost certainly on nothing more than racial profiling. I would strongly, and for your own professional sake, advise you to reconsider your present course of action. You are actively creating a serious legal and constitutional situation where none previously existed." But Officer Miller was too far gone down the rabbit hole of his own making, his ego too bruised by her articulate and legally sound resistance, his ingrained prejudices too deeply and comfortably settled. He saw not a woman calmly, intelligently, and correctly asserting her constitutional rights, but a direct, infuriating challenge to his dominance. He saw, in his distorted perception, a black woman who wasn't showing him the unquestioning, immediate deference he felt he was automatically owed by virtue of his badge and his skin color. "That's it," he snarled, his face contorted with anger. He threw open his car door with a violent motion and stepped out, his bulk seeming to fill the narrow pathway. "You're being uncooperative. You're being evasive. You refuse to identify yourself. I'm taking you in for questioning, failure to identify, and now resisting an officer." He moved towards her, his hand now firmly on his sidearm, his body language a clear, unmistakable escalation from verbal harassment to imminent physical confrontation. "Hands behind your back, ma'am. Now, don't make me force you." Anita couldn't believe it was actually happening. Here in Oakhaven, the supposedly enlightened, progressive, colorblind suburb. Here, to her, a federal judge of the United States. The sheer, unmitigated absurdity of the situation was almost comical, if it weren't so terrifyingly real, so depressingly, infuriatingly familiar from the countless stories she'd heard, the countless cases she'd presided over. She knew with an absolute chilling certainty that she could fight it physically, could argue her case with a legal brilliance that would leave him sputtering, but she also knew with an equally chilling certainty born of long and bitter experience how quickly, how easily such legitimate resistance could be twisted, misrepresented, used against her, especially given the damning optics of the situation in a world still so rife with racial bias. A lone black woman, dressed in sweats, aggressively resisting a uniformed white officer in a good neighborhood. The inflammatory headlines practically wrote themselves. The threatening black woman trope was a well-worn, tragically effective tool of character assassination, with a deep, internal sigh that seemed to carry the weight of generations of such unjust encounters. Anita slowly, deliberately, and with immense self-control turned and placed her hands behind her back. It was a tactical decision, a calculated, reluctant submission designed to de-escalate the immediate physical threat, even as every fiber of her being, every legal principle she held sacred, screamed in silent, furious protest against the egregious injustice of the moment. Miller, with a grunt of animalistic satisfaction, roughly pulled her arms back and snapped a pair of cold, unforgiving steel handcuffs onto her slender wrists. The metal bit sharply into her skin. The harsh, metallic click of the ratchet echoed in the otherwise still morning air, a sound as definitive, as ugly, and as chilling as a cell door slamming shut. "You're making a very, very serious mistake, Officer Miller," Anita said, her voice quiet, but now filled with an icy, almost preternatural conviction that should have given even a man as obtuse as him profound pause. Yeah, you can tell it to the sergeant down at the station, Miller sneered, already feeling a surge of triumphant power. He began to push her, none too gently, towards the open back door of his cruiser. He had no idea who he had just arrested. He had no inkling of the institutional storm he had just mindlessly, arrogantly unleashed upon himself and his department. He saw only what his deep-seated prejudice allowed him to see. A target, an other, someone to be controlled, someone to be put in her perceived place. And in his arrogant, fatal ignorance, he had just unlawfully detained and callously handcuffed the law itself. As he bundled her unceremoniously into the cramped, plastic-lined back seat of the patrol car, he failed to notice the small, almost imperceptible nod Anita gave to a passing dog walker, a middle-aged white woman Anita vaguely recognized from a recent introductory meeting of her new neighborhood association. The woman was now staring, her mouth agape in disbelief, her cell phone already clutched in her hand, its camera lens silently, damningly pointed towards the unfolding scene. Officer Miller also didn't register, or perhaps chose to ignore, Anita's one brief, legally precise request as he slammed the car door shut with unnecessary force. "Officer, I am now formally under arrest. I am therefore entitled to one phone call. I wish to make it now to my judicial assistant." Miller, feeling a wave of smug triumph, merely grunted what might have been an affirmative, already mentally composing the self-aggrandizing narrative of this good caller he'd include in his official report. He was about to learn, in the most public, professionally devastating, and personally humiliating way imaginable, the true, unyielding meaning of due process of law. The Oak Haven Police Department was a low-slung, unassuming brick building on the less fashionable side of town, its antique colonial-style facade belying the often outdated, deeply entrenched attitudes that, as Anita was about to discover, frequently festered within its walls. As Officer Douglas Miller paraded Judge Anita James, still in handcuffs, her running shoes scuffing against the grimy linoleum, through the main reception area towards the clatter and organized chaos of the booking desk, he felt a palpable surge of self-importance and vindication. He'd shown that uppity, law-spouting woman who was boss. He'd put her in her place. A few desk officers and a couple of civilian clerks looked up from their tasks, their expressions ranging from mild, disinterested curiosity to a shared, knowing, almost conspiratorial smirk. Another difficult one, another mouthy subject brought to heel. Standard operating procedure in their world. Anita remained silent throughout this demeaning procession, her face a carefully composed mask of judicial impassivity, though inside, a cold, controlled fury was simmering, threatening to boil over. She observed everything with the keen, analytical eye of a seasoned jurist. The peeling paint on the institutional green walls, the overflowing trash cans, the bored, cynical expressions of the dispatchers, the subtle but unmistakable air of ingrained complacency and unexamined bias that seemed to permeate the very atmosphere of the station. This was the system she worked within, the flawed, imperfect human institution she strove daily to hold accountable, to nudge, however incrementally, towards a more perfect justice. And now, with a bitter, profound irony, she was experiencing its most egregious failings from the sharp, painful end of the stick. "Got a Jane Doe here for you, Henderson," Officer Miller announced to the booking sergeant with a swagger in his voice, shoving Anita slightly forward. Sergeant Henderson was a paunchy, world-weary man in his late 50s, with a face like a roadmap of cynicism and too many double shifts, his uniform straining over his considerable girth. He was idly working a crossword puzzle, a half-eaten donut resting beside his ink-stained blotter. Possible Jane Doe, anyway. Failure to ID, definitely resisting an officer, maybe a loitering with intent charge. We'll see how creative we can get with the paperwork. Found her casing the rich folks' houses over by Willow Creek Park. Gave me a real hard time, this one. Sergeant Henderson grunted, not even bothering to look up from his puzzle. Yeah, another charmer. Put her in holding cell 3. I'll get to her paperwork when I'm good and ready, Miller. Got a backlog here, and this damn crossword ain't gonna solve itself. He circled a word with his pen, oblivious. Actually, Sergeant, Anita's voice, though quiet, cut through the stale, coffee-scented air of the booking room with the precision and authority of a well-honed scalpel. It was a voice accustomed to commanding attention, to cutting through obfuscation and bluster. It made both Officer Miller and Sergeant Henderson finally look up, really look up, at her. You will process me now, as per departmental and state regulations regarding detainees, and you will immediately allow me my legally protected right to a single, unimpeded phone call, which your officer, she inclined her head slightly, towards a suddenly very uncomfortable-looking Miller, has thus far conveniently ignored and actively obstructed, despite my repeated, clear, and lawful request. Henderson blinked, momentarily taken aback by her articulate and authoritative tone, so at odds with the usual incoherent protests or sullen silence he got from most of the people Miller brought in. He glanced at Miller, a questioning, slightly annoyed look in his tired eyes. Miller just shrugged, a significant portion of his earlier bravado visibly deflating under the direct, intelligent, and undeniably powerful gaze of his detainee. She's been mouthing off like a damn public defender since I picked her up, Sarge, Miller grumbled defensively, trying to regain some semblance of control. Perhaps that is because I am one, or rather was one, for many years, Anita said, her voice remaining perfectly even, almost conversational, yet carrying an unmistakable undercurrent of steel. And a federal judge, to be precise, the Honorable Anita James, United States District Court for the Northern District of Georgia. And you, Officer Miller, are currently in the process of committing a rather egregious series of profound and actionable civil rights violations, which I am, as we speak, documenting with considerable professional interest and no small amount of personal dismay. A stunned, almost comical silence descended upon the Oakhaven police booking room. Sergeant Henderson's jaw literally dropped, his crossword puzzle forgotten. Officer Miller's face, which had been a ruddy hue of self-satisfaction moments before, drained of all color, leaving it a pasty, sickly white. He stared at Anita as if seeing her for the very first time. The nondescript running clothes and simple knit cap suddenly irrelevant, replaced in his mind's eye by an almost visible aura of black robes and judicial power. "Judge?" he stammered, his voice barely a squeak, his bravado utterly shattered. You're the Judge James?" Before Anita could respond, or Miller could further incriminate himself, the main double doors of the precinct burst open with an authoritative whoosh. 2 men in dark, impeccably tailored suits strode in with an air of urgent, no-nonsense purpose, their expressions grim, their movements swift and economical. They were flanked, almost imperceptibly but unmistakably, by 2 uniformed U.S. Marshals, whose presence alone in a small suburban police station signaled an event of extraordinary significance. The lead agent, a tall, athletic man with sharp, intelligent eyes, flashed his credentials, a gold FBI shield, at the now gaping Sergeant Henderson. Special Agent Marcus Davies, Federal Bureau of Investigation Civil Rights Division. We're here for Judge Anita James, and we have more than a few questions for Officer Miller, and indeed, for anyone else who was involved in her unlawful detainment and arrest. The entree of every officer and civilian employee in the immediate vicinity seemed to twitch simultaneously. The casual, bored, almost listless atmosphere of the station evaporated in an instant, replaced by a palpable, crackling tension. Phones began to ring off the hook as word spread. Whispers turned into frantic, hushed, and increasingly panicked conversations. The dog walker Anita had nodded to on the trail, a woman named Carol Bethune, had, it turned out, not only immediately called 911 to report an Oak Haven police officer behaving erratically and aggressively towards a black woman jogger, but had also, being a savvy, retired local journalist with an unerring nose for a story, immediately called her former editor at the Oak Haven Chronicle, and then, remembering a name from a recent neighborhood association directory, had dialed Judge Anita James's chambers. Anita's judicial assistant, a hyper-efficient, fiercely loyal, and incredibly resourceful young man named Marcus Thorne, had moved with the speed and precision of a striking cobra. Upon hearing Carol Bethune's breathless, outraged account, he had immediately alerted the chief judge of their federal district, the U.S. Marshal Service, who were statutorily responsible for the protection and security of all federal judges, and the local FBI field office, specifically requesting the intervention of the Civil Rights Division. The institutional wheels of federal power, once set in motion, ground inexorably and with formidable speed. Officer Douglas Miller looked as though he was about to be physically ill. His short, unremarkable career, his carefully constructed reputation within the department, his entire self-conception as a good cop doing tough but necessary work, were imploding in real time before his very eyes. Sergeant Henderson, meanwhile, was fumbling desperately to unlock Anita's handcuffs, his usually steady hands shaking so violently he could barely manage the small key. "Your Honor, Judge, ma'am, we had no idea. There's clearly been a terrible, terrible mistake," he babbled, his face slick with a sudden cold sweat. "There has indeed been a mistake, Sergeant," Anita said, her voice still quiet, but now carrying the full, unmistakable, and utterly chilling weight of the federal judiciary. She rubbed her wrists pointedly as the cuffs finally fell away with a soft clink. "A mistake that will be rectified, thoroughly, and with all due diligence." Special Agent Davies turned his cool, appraising gaze upon Officer Miller, his voice like chips of ice. "Officer Miller, you are to remain here in this precinct. You will not leave. You will not make any calls. You will not speak to anyone further regarding this incident without an attorney present, preferably one who specializes in defending officers against federal civil rights litigation, because I assure you, you are going to need one of an exceptionally high caliber. Your badge and your service weapon now, if you please." Miller, looking utterly defeated, his face a mask of dazed disbelief, slowly, dazedly unclipped his badge from his uniform shirt and unholstered his weapon, placing them with a heavy, final-sounding clatter on the scarred surface of the booking counter. The metallic sound seemed to echo the definitive crash of his career and his illusions of impunity. The news of a sitting federal judge being unlawfully arrested by a local Oak Haven cop during her morning jog spread through the town, then the wider state legal community, and finally, with the speed of a digital wildfire, across national media outlets. The Oak Haven incident ignited a national firestorm. Officer Miller's career was summarily terminated, and the Oak Haven PD faced a rigorous federal overhaul, implementing sweeping reforms against racial profiling and abuse of authority under intense scrutiny. Judge Anita James, with characteristic fortitude, transformed her degrading arrest into a catalyst for change, championing new legislation and training initiatives to ensure such injustices were more fiercely combated. Her story became a stark lesson. Prejudice lurks everywhere, but the arc of justice, however long, can be bent by courage and the unassailable truth of one's rights. This narrative is a testament to the power of resilience in the face of systemic bias. If stories like Judge James's, where integrity confronts injustice, inspire you, please support our channel. Like this video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next compelling account. Share your thoughts and where you're watching from in the comments below. Thank you for joining us.